of those carriers, the threats that may come against those carriers, and mitigating those risks. And can you tell us today, are there times, we have 5, of course, on the East Coast, are there times when there are fewer than 5 import and as few as, say, 2 carriers imported at any one time?
Yes, sir. The carrier numbers fluctuate depending on how many are deployed, how many may be out for local operations. So the number of carriers in port at any given time varies.
And it can go down to, we've had times then where we've had as few as 2 and even as few as 1, correct, in port?
I've been in Norfolk, signed there for a long time, and I've seen the piers empty at times.
That's correct. And so there are times the ship's log would indicate that there have been 0 carriers in port and for some period of time. We know that the Enterprise is being decommissioned, and the math is pretty simple. That's going to take us down to 4. Is it reasonable to assume then that as the number of carriers decreases on the East Coast, that the number of days total days that our carriers are in port would also decrease, correct? Do you follow me on that logic?
I'm following you very well, yes, sir.
Okay. So is the target for the terrorists, the number of targets decrease, the threat also decreases against that particular asset. Would you agree with that, Admiral?
I think it's important to think not simply in terms of the ships alone, but the infrastructure that's required to support them, to maintain them, to husband them. So even though if an aircraft carrier is at sea, it still has to come back in to perhaps have nuclear maintenance performed on it. And right now, Norfolk, Virginia, or the Hampton Roads area, an area of about 15-mile radius, is the only place on the East Coast where we can do that.
Correct, and that also is true, isn't it, of our SSBNs? We have the operations on the east at Kings Bay and also on the West Coast, just one. Is that correct?
That's not true when you get to the infrastructure, sir, because we have Kings Bay. We can bring a nuclear ballistic submarine into Hampton Roads to do maintenance there, either at Newport News or at the shipyard. And then, if we have to, we could also take it up to New London to have work done at Electric Boat up there. So I have 3 sites on the East Coast where I can take care of our nuclear submarines. I have many sites on the East Coast where I can take care of our conventional ships. I currently have 1 place on the East Coast where I can maintain a nuclear aircraft carrier.
As I read your testimony, which I appreciate you sharing with us, it indicated that one of the risks is, I guess, weather or environmental things like that. Given that carriers, by their nature, are mobile, I frankly don't place much weight on that particular one. I am fully concerned about a terrorist attack. But given the fact that we're already in a decreasing risk environment, just by the sense that we are decreasing from 5 to 4 on the East Coast, and also in this context of an extraordinary times that we're in from a fiscal standpoint, that with my business background I can see, unfortunately, is only going to increase, and in a rather dramatic way. The decisions that we make here, those who follow us 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years down the road, I think are going to continue to be under enormous pressure. So it's disconcerting to me to see that Mayport still is a path that is being considered by the Navy for an East Coast home port for one of our nuclear aircraft carriers. Would you consider, if formally requested, an evaluation at this time which would recognize that our fiscal situation is very dynamic, and would you reevaluate that decision just given the fact that there's enormous fiscal pressure on us?
I think the going-on argument from me from the very beginning of the strategic dispersal was the fact that having the flexibility, and especially looking to the south, we're going to see changes in shipping patterns when the Panama Canal expands. So the southern regions, I think, will become more dynamic, not less. I believe as we look out into the future, the approaches from the South Atlantic, particularly as Africa, really becomes more central to international security affairs and resources. I think having the strategic dispersal, having the redundancy and being able to take care of these very capital ships that we have on, will be more and more important to us.
Yeah, Admiral, I'd say this. In a perfect environment, I would be fully supportive of more strategic dispersal. I do, as I look at our SSBNs and see that we really, in many ways, have not dispersed those assets, it's difficult to process why we're so committed in this extraordinary fiscal environment of dispersing the carriers. I think once it gets there, if there is one that is moved, you're dealing with one carrier, and then it goes to sea, and all those assets are, all the infrastructure is there for nothing, in effect.
I would say that infrastructure is available to give us the redundancy that we need in the carrier force, but it's also maintenance capability that can be used on other ships of the Navy as well.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all of you for your perseverance today and your testimony and your hard work on behalf of our nation. I appreciate it very much. Secretary Mavis, thank you for our recent phone call and your assistance in